We want to get on with our speaker here and introduce. I'm going to start by introducing our day chair, Rob Scarlett. Find his bio. So Rob is also our International Service Committee chair, but Rob has had a 40-year career in international sales and manufacturing, and although still actively helping small to mid-sized firms in the international market entry, he has shifted more of his time into service as a director and/or advisor to a number of small and medium-sized companies in the philanthropic organizations. Shortly after graduating from Carleton College in 1966, he became part of a private NGO team that created some of Latin America's first microfinanced institutions. Building on that experience, he began a decades-long business career that kept him active throughout Latin America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. In 1999, to help launch his independent consulting career, Rob authored with Dr. Lawrence Koslow a book titled Global Business 308 Tips for Taking Your Company Worldwide. I'm not sure why it's 308 and not 309, but in addition to as in international business consulting, Rob currently serves as a board member or advisor for many organizations. Some of those include the Avica Group, Minapura, Venn Foundation, Sundance Family, the Brazil Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for your service. In recent years, though, Rob has also served as a board chair for the Global Minnesota and president of Minnesota Uruguay Partners of the Americas. He grew up in Germany and acquired German as his second language. He later acquired fluency in Spanish and Portuguese and has also lived and worked throughout Europe, South Africa, and most countries in Latin America. As I mentioned, he's also our International Service Chair. Please welcome Rob Scarlett.
Auf Deutsch, okay, yes. Ja, sicher, das kann ich schon schaffen. Okay. It really, this is just too much fun. I mean, I mean, with the shirt and everything, this is just, I'm having a great time and really look forward to having this honor to introduce our speaker today, Jeff Olson. And today we're going to hear about what talent Minnesota, not Iowa, just for those who are, but what talent Minnesota has contributed to the NHL. And our speaker, Jeff Olson, really knows hockey. He has coached in youth hockey and the Pee Wee hockey. He's coached bantam hockey. He's coached high school hockey. Is there anything else? And he has served as assistant coach at West St. Paul Sibley and New Ulm. Right, that's where the German comes in handy, right, Jeff? And he also has coached in Litchfield, as well as at the college level at Hamline for a period of time. Jeff has officiated as well, so I'm not sure how we're going to get along. I never got along very well with umpires and refs and officials, but nonetheless, he served very well in that capacity, both in adult and youth hockey. He grew up in Mendota Heights, played high school hockey at Breck School. He also attended Ken Yackel Hockey School with Lou Nanne, who you've heard his name, I'm sure, mentioned before. Aside from his hockey career, in his avocation, Jeff has worked as a trial attorney for 36 years, whilst also serving for 10 years as a part-time arbitrator and referee in Ramsey County Conciliation Court. He has found time to be active as a volunteer with a number of Minnesota nonprofits and charities, including board chair of STEP Academy, Minnesota's charter school, president of Parks and Trails Council of Minnesota, president of Fort Snelling State Park Association, president of Eden Prairie Rotary, AM. Welcome, in spite of that. And so, the commissioner of Three Rivers Park District, president of All Saints Lutheran Church of Minnesota. Jeff and his wife live in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. They share a passion for reading, great food, theater, music, hiking, biking, golfing, visiting parks, attending Minnesota City of Lakes meetings to hear the music, and hockey. The bucket list includes, for the two of them, both for Jeff and Sue, is to visit all Minnesota's wonderful state parks and, not surprisingly, every hockey arena in Minnesota. So please welcome Jeff Olson to the podium.
Are you ready for some hockey? First, important, at 3 paperweights for your President Ross. Let's hear it for Doc. And Brock. The New York Islanders, that we'll find out in a minute, is tied to Stanley Cup, so we'll talk about that. And also, this season is tied to a team that has one of the most of the 32 teams, Minnesota players. Before we begin, I need to salute and honor 3 of the giants of your membership. Those 3 are Bob Minish, Mike Pritchard, and Grant Merritt. Bob, where we are, we salute you. They have gone way beyond in community service. I've known them for years. Bob Minish, the Sibley Historic Site, and on the board with myself with Fortune State Park Association, done incredible things for the state of Minnesota. Bob, I salute you. Interesting sidelight with sports. I've known Bob for years and years and years, 30 years. You've probably known him for years. He's been a huge member of this club. But a sports note that I never knew before until just recently. He's the one that decided the ABA red, white, and blue basketball. Anybody know that? Interesting thing. The ABA was started basically by George Mikan. And it was headquartered here in Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, for 3 years before I went to New York City. As they started a lot of revolutionary things, creativity, and starting that league. So their offices were right next to Pop and Hague, where Bob Minish was practicing law, and they did some of the work. And Bob Minish did the original contracts. So as they're doing all this work before the very beginning of the first season to kick off the whole league, George Mikan's there with his assistant, and they got a tie vote. Should we have this really revolutionary thing to have a colored, all these colors on a basketball and play that as league ball or not? Tie vote. Hey, Bob, break the tie. Well, it's American Basketball Association. I'm going with the red, white, and blue. So he's the one that chose it. And that ball is in the Smithsonian Institute for a number of reasons. It's the African-American Museum because of the strong role it played in breaking down a lot of the stereotypes or a lot of the restrictions for African Americans in basketball in the NBA. So way to go, Bob. The other I wanted to mention is Grant Merritt. And I am in the middle of a program series. I name it after Grant. He passed away last April, Minnesota's greatest environmentalist. And his book was just recently, it seems like it was just a year or two ago, but 2018. So out on the table, if you're at all interested, Ross, indulge me. I call it the Grant Merritt Community Environment Nature Program Series. So we're in the middle of that. We have 6 more on Tuesday evenings at 7 o'clock. If you're interested at all, grab a sheet outside on the table. Second, with Grant, I'm in the process, if anybody's at all interested, of getting a park in his honor and his name on the North Shore by where reserve mining was shipping. One of the programs we already had was reserve mining. We had Peter Gov that worked for Governor Anderson, and he was the 3rd PCA pollution control director. Grant was the 1st, and we had Jonathan Morgan, who was the attorney that started that lawsuit and attorney for the first 8 years before Judge Lord. 72,000 tons of tailings every day to the drinking water of city of Duluth. And at that time, they didn't know it had asbestos in it. They found it later. But anyhow, Grant, we salute you. We think of you and your spirits here today. Thank you.
Jeff, Bob Minish, I finally got back on the Zoom call. Glad to see you.
All right. This story is about Minnesota homegrown players through grit, determination, endurance, spirit, strength, perseverance that make it to the greatest hockey league in the world, the NHL. We're celebrating that. You may know one of these hockey greats as a member of your family, a cousin, a nephew, may have been a neighbor, somebody across the street, across town. You may have seen some of their games in high school or college or pro, or you may have followed them along in the newspapers, TV, radio. That's what this is about. This story begins with the right index finger on the surface that's cold to the touch. Then there's an engraved vertical line. Then 90 degrees to that, a horizontal engraved line. It's a uppercase letter L. Then that right index finger, it's a small A, then an N, then a G. It's Langevin, Dave Langevin. He's holding up the Stanley Cup. He is fingering his name on the Stanley Cup. It's 10:35 on a Tuesday evening, May 17th, 1983, the Nassau County Coliseum, 22 miles east of Manhattan. He has the Stanley Cup in his hands. They have just defeated the Edmonton Oilers 4-0. They swept the finals. He, in holding up that cup, he has felt his name 3 different places. This is his 4th Stanley Cup in a row. Unbelievable. Billy Smith, the Hall of Famer, handed him the cup. Each player skates around 1 lap holding up that cup before Dennis Potvin had gotten it from the commissioner. Smith gave it to Langevin because who does a goalie like best? That defenseman that clears out in front of the goalie. Langevin had an incredible year that year. He was an NHL All-Star, a high pedigree. He'd been an All-Star 1 year, 1979, in the WHA. So he holding up that cup 4 times in a row, being the All-Star. In his head, he thought back to Hazel Park, just off K Street, east of White Bear Avenue, in east side of St. Paul, where he grew up, where he played his outdoor hockey. He had a vision. He kept thinking of all the players from Minnesota that were playing that season, 82, 83. And he started to have a vision of those players. He thought of playing Adrian Murray, but he thought of all those players. There were 31 players that season. A number of high marks before 82, 83, and now 2023, 40 seasons. There's never been a season with that many Minnesota homegrown players contributing strongly in the NHL. Yeah, there was 1 or 2 slight exceptions of somebody that came retired just before or after. So it's more like 28 or 29. So there is the remote. Oh, sorry. Oh, no. All right, there we go. 2 minute mind polling in the box. All right, the Stanley Cup. Minnesota, we got to look at it hard because North Stars were 25 years. Wild now is 22, 47 years. We have 0. There he is, holding up Dave Langevin. So I said, no other season has had as many Minnesotans. Also, no other player has won as many Stanley Cups as he had by 1983, and it's been 40 seasons. No other player. So Langevin is your answer to your trivia question there. There he is. 1972 at Aldrich when Hill Murray won the independent tournament. So he went 4 years at UMD. Then he won his first Stanley Cup in 1980. 1979 in the WHA, he went to the finals and he played with number 99, Wayne Gretzky. They lost to the Jets. Then the year after 83, he plays in the finals again. So he's 6 years in a row in the finals. This year at 83, who does he beat the Oilers? Gretzky, Messier, Curry, Anderson, Coffey. All right. So in Minnesota homegrown hockey, there's 4 levels, 4 waves. We've talked about 82, 83. It's the biggest wave, as I mentioned. 5 years before, there were 1920 players in 1978 playing that season, contributed strongly. An early era, back in the late 30s to the 40s, there was another strong area of Minnesota hockey. And then a 4th wave is 2002 to 2009, a grand 7 years, they call it 18 players. Then we see about half of those players still playing. Zach Parisi, Brock Nelson, Anders Lee from Edina, Kyle Poso from Shattuck, those players. So 4 different waves. But this 82, 83 broke down the wall, I call it, of the NHL of not having any or very, very, very few Americans or Minnesotans playing. So after 1948, 1950, all through the 50s, the only player was Tommy Williams from Duluth. Ken Yackel played 6 games for the Bruins from Minnesota. Otherwise, very little. 1 or 2 players in the 60s, even when the North Stars came in 67. So that first wave at 78, they broke it down a little bit, opened the door, but this 82, 83 was the big season to really show a presence. So look at some of these players. All-stars, 3 all-stars that season, including Landrum that we talked about. This is an unusual thing. Head coaches. It's the only time during the 1980s when there are 2 Minnesota homegrown meaning they grew up in Minnesota youth hockey and played high school. Where was Bob Johnson from Minneapolis Central, 1949? Where was, we always think of him as Badgers, but he went into the NHL. What did he do in the NHL? Flames, and he won 2 Stanley Cups with the Penguins. Unfortunately, the second Stanley Cup, he had died of brain cancer that November, but Scotty Bowman said put his name on that cup, 92. So no other time other than this season do you have 2 head coaches from Minnesota. Now, Phil Housley coached 2 years for the Sabres, got fired, I think, 3 years ago. Todd Richards for a year, in fact, with the Wild a little bit. Paul Holmgren had 8 years, 4 with the Whalers, 4 with the Flyers, but never having 2 in the same season. And you see number of players were captains. Then you have season totals there with the various teams. So this first wave, 21 players, you could see the season that they were, which season was. These are all players in the season. Was this their first season, second season? Antonovich, Landrum, second season, but Paradise, 7th season for the Penguins. So some of these players went first in the WHA and then switched to the NHL. Some like Paradise and Larson went directly to the NHL. Others, the WHA and then switched over like Landrum did. So they really, Bob Paradise, Mike Antonovich, Reed Larson, Warren Miller, South St. Paul, Gary Sargent from. So here's the other players from that first wave. Tim Sheaf from International Falls, Telfas from Hastings. So an interesting thing, we'll talk about this with more players, but here we're sitting right here and a short distance away, we'll take a look at this with the players. So here is Nyrop with the Bantam team in Edina. They won the state championship. They also went to a national Bantam tournament. They didn't win that. The team that won was from Detroit. You know who was on that team? Gordie Howe's 3 sons, Mark, Marty, and Mike. But they're a great team. And this is what's incredible thing, that he graduated from Edina in 1970. Everyone remembers the 1969 game against Henry Boucher and Warroad. But he goes to Notre Dame, plays 4 years. So 1974, he gets called up in 1976 from the minors after 1 year. The team he gets called up to wins the Stanley Cup, has 9 Hall of Famers on it. You're lucky if you have 1 or 2 maybe three playing on one team, maybe at their end of their prime. These players were all in their prime. Nyrock wasn't just sitting on the bench or taking a shift every once in a while. He was the second shift with Guy Lapointe on defense. Larry Robinson and Serge Savard was the first shift. He was playing strong. He won 3 Stanley Cups in a row, Nyrock, with the Canadians. But 9 Hall of Famers, just absolutely unheard of. North Stars, 25 years. How many Hall of Famers they have? 1, Dino Cicerelli. Here on one team, 9. You can imagine what practice was like. So here he goes from Bantams and Braemar Arena, and we'll talk in a minute about his outdoor ice at Arden Park in Edina, to joining this team with 19 games of regular season and playing through to win the cup in the finals. Just an incredible. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the golden era. People think, oh, hockey has always been great. And Mary, that was an incredible, great gold standard reflections. Thank you. The golden era, 1960 to 1982, 22 years. Minnesota hockey was a stark contrast before 1960. And if you look at each of these factors, you take away one, it lessens the transformative nature, the huge change, the huge explosion of hockey during that time. So let's take a look at them. Indoor arenas. When I say 16, it really was more about 12 or 13. The Twin City area had basically 4. You had the Hippodrome at State Fair, at Hippodrome White Bear Lake, at St. Paul Auditorium. You had the Minneapolis Arena on 29th and DuPont right by Lake Street. And then Williams Arena came along not till 1950. They didn't have an indoor rink at the U until then. So you had 5, and then Golden Valley Ice Center came in 1958. So you had 6 hockey arenas indoor. The rest of the state, it was only in the Iron Range, Hibbing, Evelyn, Virginia, and then Roseau and Warrow in the upper northwest corner, and Duluth Curling Club. So 12 or 13 to 130. What's that? 10-fold increase in 22 years. Very transformative for hockey. High school teams doubled in 22 years. Before you had 19 private schools, Catholic schools, 56 public schools. Went to 154, so more than doubled. Quality of high school coaches. Just mention a few. High school coaches are the core, the center, incredible. I mean, here you have Willard Eichelad, won 2 NCAA championships with Michigan. He won a silver medal in the Olympics in 1956, and he goes to Edina. Doug Wooten won a national championship in junior hockey, goes to South St. Paul during this time. Tom Satterdahl at Bloomington Jefferson, he had coached as assistant coach at 2 colleges, Bemidji State and at the U, Division I school. He'd won 2 state championships in Wisconsin before arriving at Jefferson. Incredible upgrade of coaches. The coaches that played college hockey, that have been leading their leagues, have been captains. State hockey tournament, of course, went from St. Paul Auditorium, then the Met Sports Center, then to St. Paul Civic Center. What happened in those 22 years? The NHL arrived, the North Stars. Okay, what does that do? The hockey culture. They're on the radio, they're on the TV, you're reading about it in the paper. They're talking about it. You're going to games like Mary did. Then 5 years later, WHA, just 8 miles away, you had 2 teams playing St. Paul Fighting Saints and the North Stars. College hockey increase. We talk about Minnesota, but for 26 years, from 1948, when they started NCAA Division I hockey championship, till 1974, University of Minnesota had 0. The state of Minnesota had 0. State of Michigan had 8 from the University of Michigan. They actually had 12 with Michigan Tech. So what does that do when you win 3 NCAA championships? UMD wasn't Division I till early 60s. So during this 22 years. Then, of course, you had these colorful characters, Badger Bob, you had Herb Brooks, and it increased the attendance like crazy. They're on TV, they're on radio, huge together. 3 fountainhead figures, hockey ambassadors. Douglas Brinkley, for your presidential historians, he called it a Zeitgeist, a fountainhead figure, Theodore Roosevelt. They're just the factors of influence, the things that came apart, and that's true of these 3 fountainhead. You take away those 3, it's not quite as transformative, because what were they doing? They're ambassadors for hockey. They're saying Litchfield, Moorhead, Alexander, you got to build into a rink. You got to get a hockey team. You got to do that. City council members, mayor, you got to pay for it, or minor league, your youth hockey, get the money, do it. Then the other thing that you cannot set aside, the huge increase in population, but especially huge increase in good paying jobs. Before 1960, no Medtronic, no Univac, no control data, no General Mills. In the book, we've got General Mills and Pillsbury, of course, they merged, but it's a four-fold increase. You look at Bloomington, population 1950 to 1970, 8,000 something to 86,000, a ninefold increase. Edina was there with Morningside of 10, 12,000, but by early 70s, they were, or late 60s, 1970 population, they were 44,000, so fourfold increase. But the good paying jobs, where are those people coming from? North Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, they're coming all around the United States, coming from all over the world to work at these places. And what good paying jobs takes a lot to pay for hockey. And they're putting their kids in hockey programs. All right, there they are, the three far net figures. Mariucci on the left, Lou Nanne, the face of hockey in Minnesota, and there's Herb Brooks. So had to throw this in because before 1960, that's my mom, the Minneapolis Arena, they got torn down, but that's where the Millers played. Ken Yackel was huge during that league during that time, but that's an example of Minneapolis Arena. Here's Lakota, 1962. That's when Aldrich was built in the border with Maplewood and east side of St. Paul. And in 1965 was with Braemar. Those were kind of the three key arenas in all they're doing. Time for lunch or what? No? All right. So here's another, here's a guy in Hutchinson. He did all the work building the Hutchinson Arena. Another example, Hutchinson had no hockey before that. Built this arena in 77. Here's an interesting, and we're sitting almost in the middle of this radius of players. This is for 12 years, 1970 when Nyrop graduated from Edina to Phil Housley, 1982 when he graduated from South St. Paul. So you have 12 years, 11 defensemen that all had big, huge careers in the NHL. Almost all of them played over 500 games. Some of them, Ramsey was over 1,000, 904 for Reed Larson. The only two that were less than 500 were Nyrop and Don Jackson. But look at the size, all defense. And then you would think, oh, is it a Minnesota style because of the coaches? Hey, there couldn't be more different style of play. Over here on the far defensive defenseman is Longeman. Then you have maybe Jim Korn from Hopkins, just a hard-hitting defender. And then you move with Nyrop and you move towards the middle, maybe of Mike Ramsey. And over here on the far end of the spectrum, Phil Housley, one of the most talented, highest scoring offensive defensemen ever, following the wake of the revolutionizing the position of offensive defenseman of Bobby Orr. But he's up there with Paul Coffey, with Ray Bork, and the top offensive defenseman. Then next to him, maybe a little step toward the middle is Reed. The most different styles of play of these 11 defensemen. Look at the size at the top, 6'2", 6'2". Then you have these players, that's the year of the graduation, 74, 74, 74, 75, 6'4", 6'3". So who's in the Hall of Fame? The smallest, the one on the bottom, Phil Housley. Key thing is outdoor rinks. Talked about where we're sitting right now. You go over to France Avenue, go down to 54th Street, go west about 2-3 blocks, you hit Minnehaha Park, there's Arden Park. Bill Nyrop had 3 older sisters. Nancy, one of his older sisters, said, we could not drag Bill home for supper. He lived there. Reed Larson at Sibley Park, just 4 miles down, maybe 1 mile to the east. He lived 2 blocks from there. His mom on Saturdays would pack him a lunch to leave after breakfast, come home with supper, then go back over there. He had a thing with his buddies in the rink attendant where when they turn off all the lights for the whole park, which includes the general ice skating rink, the hockey rink, and of course in the summer and in the fall, the football field, all that. He'd turn off the lights, kick everybody out of the warming house, clean up. But he had to deal with Reed and his 3 buddies when they're 13, 14, 15 years old. When I turn back on the lights, you guys can go back, just promise me you'll turn the lights off and lock up. So they 9 o'clock to 10 to 11, they get 2, 3, 4 more hours of sleep, of skating. So there it is. The one person I want you to remember, Phil Housley, for a lot of reasons. He is the only Hall of Fame player in contemporary Minnesota hockey. Now, a couple others maybe he should go in, but he is at 21 season, 7-time All-Star. The other, he's the king of the power play, incredible. So that's a lot of the book, is a lot of Minnesota records of achievement and Lou Nanne that wrote the Ford, and I was able to use Lou's descriptions about 7 or 8 of the players. That's the main thing he thought, hey, this has never been done before. We have records achievements of Minnesota players. So you break down, all right, playoffs, who has the most games played in the playoffs? Who has the most goals in the total playoffs career? How about per playoff series? So Housley is the one you should remember. The other thing is he came directly from high school to the NHL. So he didn't go to the juniors, didn't go to the development team, didn't go to college. They didn't send him down to the minors for a couple of months. He was drafted high, 6th overall. And the first game of the season, he's playing. And what's he playing on? The power play, where you put your most skilled players. All right, here's list the overall league. The other thing I want you to remember is Scotty Bowman. He's the god of hockey. We got 2 minutes, I'll stop. All right, I'm stopping in 2 minutes. The god of hockey, Scotty Bowman. He's a key person in 3 players that were huge players, and actually even a 4th. Why is he the god of hockey? He is 300 miles before the next person. Most wins as a coach, most Stanley Cups, 9. A brilliant mind through the years. He won with a number of different teams. The Canadians during the 70s, the dynasty team. He won with the Red Wings and the Penguins for Stanley Cups and different players. So Bill Nyrup, he's coach. Scotty Bowman's the coach. The Canadians when Nyrup gets called up. Mike Ramsey, he is now general manager and coach of the Sabres. He meaning Scotty Bowman, and he picks Ramsey 11th overall. He's the most revered, the most elite mind in hockey. And this is not somebody that's a brand new general manager that thought he'd take a wild shot at the player. Why is this important? Because it shows the rest of the league. Oh, if Scotty Bowman's doing that, must be good. Look what these players did. They go on to have great careers. Then Phil Housley, just 3 years later in '82, saying, I want you to go to play immediately in the NHL. So I'm going to stop, but I'll give you one. In writing the book, it was incredible having a lot of contact with Lou Nanne, but I tried to track down the god of hockey because I wanted to find out if he had actually seen Phil Housley himself. Had he gone to Minnesota, watched him play before he's going to pay him all this money and draft him so high, the first pick of the Sabres that season. So I had tried, put in a few inquiries, and I'm at work and I see this number that I don't recognize. So I let go to voicemail. I play back the voicemail. Jeff, Scotty Bowman, Ken Dryden told me to give you a call. So I told my sister, who was a big movie fan, I said, this is like Barb, this is Meryl Streep. Susan Sarandon told me to give you a call. I told my wife, that's it. If this book thing falls apart today, it's been well worth it. Thank you. All right, one of the things with the Stanley Cup, the last 25 years, is the get your picture taken with it because we don't see it other than this. They have members. If your team wins, you get the cup for 2 days during the summer, and you can take it wherever you want. Now, during the Ukraine war, they did not let the Russian players take it back to Russia, but you can have it in Helsinki. You can have it, wherever you are. So here is Ryan McDonough. Usually, what you do, you take it to your school, you bring it to your home rink, then you have it at home or you do whatever. So not the last summer, but the summer before Tampa Bay Lightning and the summer before that. So he brought to the Shamrock Lounge on West 7th Street in Randolph. There he is with the cup on the bar. And he brought to fire station, brought to his high school, Cretin. And then he's got a little lake cabin, his family in western Wisconsin, put it in the back of the boat and drove around. So get your picture taken with the cup. And you can forward your photo to your brother in Milwaukee or your sister in San Diego or your buddy and say, hey, this morning, what'd you do? I saw the Stanley Cup and I put it over my head. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff, before you skate off the ice, and before you leave the building, I'm going to come over and give you some book. The book is for a young third grader in the Way to Grow program, which we support here. It's a marvelous program for young people birthed to about 8 years old. gives them a wonderful head start in their education, gives them all the foundations they need. We also are happy to give you a monogrammed pen with your name correctly spelled from the Minnesota City of Lakes Rotary Club. And thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Thanks, Rob. I want to also thank our volunteers, but before I forget, everybody who's wearing a jersey, and if you're not, that's fine too, but we want you to come up after the meeting and we'll take a big picture with everybody in their jerseys. So please don't escape. But I want to thank our volunteers, our greeter, Bob Baker, reflection from Mary Pat, coming, vocational from Ray Lynn. She's already left for school. Our day chair, Rob Scarlett, Zoom masters, Brock and Greg, and our club administrator, Dick. Next week, we have Jacqueline Olson and Joseph Bosch, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a part of our Courageous Conversation series. So they'll be talking about auto theft in Minnesota and what you can do to protect yourself. So please come learn more about that problem and what you can do when you're out and about. So and then the 22nd, we have our vocational roundtables. So please join us for those and please continue to invite those guests. With that, go out and have a wonderful Rotary week.